at the end of the last ice age, Lake Champlain was part of the sea, connected through what was the St. Lawrence. And so the shoreline of that ancient sea was right about the level of where the fort is today. So we're on a limestone base. As you work your way up the hill, the limestone disappears and you switch into a different stratus of rock. You notice Mount Defiance wasn't limestone. So this is kind of the shoreline of what's called geologically the Sea of Vermont. And so this ridge here is where the French decided to build Fort Carillon. We're going to learn a lot about the French and Indian War in a short period of time today with John. But historically, the history of Fort Carillon, the French decide to build the fort after the Battle of Lake George in September 1755, where the French and the British fight at the southern end of Lake George. The person in charge of constructing Fort Carillon is Michel Chartier de Lotbinière. And people tell me my French is good. That's only because I say the same few names over and over. My French in general is not that good. He is assigned, he's a Canadian-born, French-trained military engineer, and he is assigned to build a fortification here at Carillon. And there's all sorts of versions of where the name Carillon comes from. The one that's most widely out there, that's probably the most wrong, is that as the French are building the fort, they can hear the waterfalls of the Lachute River, and it reminds them of the Carillon bells at home. Sounds really good, and that you'll still see that everywhere. But what we believe is the actual history of that name is this point was used as a trading post in the late 1600s, and a retired French officer runs the trading post, but he's a Spaniard, so his name is Carillon, C-A-R-R-I-O-N, and the French spelling of that becomes Carillon with a double L, and this just became known as Carillon's point because it's where his trading post was. When this fort was ordered to be constructed in 1755, the original plans call it Fort Vaudreuil. Vaudreuil is the Governor General of New France, and it's going to be named after him, but the soldiers are already calling it Carillon, and the name just sticks. Kind of like trying to get people to say facial tissue. They all call it Kleenex, even though it's not Kleenex. So Michel Chartier de Lotbinière begins constructing the fort. He has to determine where to put the fort. It's completely wooded. He has to identify the location. There's a lot of... The nice thing about history is you can debate anything. There's a lot of debate. Is the fort built in the proper location? There are some vulnerabilities here. Imagine 100-foot tall trees as you're trying to figure out where to build the fort. The obvious weak point is Mount Defiance, but that doesn't really become an issue during the French and Indian War. Another weak point is the heights of Carillon, which we're going to go exploring this afternoon. The top of that hill is about 100 feet higher than Fort Ticonderoga, so if an enemy can get a cannon on that heights there, the fort becomes vulnerable to that. Other people say that the fort's too far from the point. When we were up on Mount Defiance, you can see the fort, and then it's a ways out to the end of the point. And you can't control traffic actually passing between the 2 points. What you can control it as it's coming up the lake. So if it's gotten to there, it's probably too late anyway. But Lotbinière begins construction in 1755. Even though he's a military engineer, he's never built a fort before. But he gets the job because his cousin just happens to be the governor of New France. That also buys him some cover. Today, I think we would call him an entrepreneur, to be polite about it. He gets paid as a military officer for constructing the fort. As you're building a fort, you need some things. We don't have bulldozers, but you have oxen and horses you needed for the construction. The King's Army doesn't own them; they have to lease them from somebody. They lease them from Lotbinière, so he's getting paid for the use of his animals to help build the fort. As a soldier here, you don't have to help construct the fort in your off hours, but what else are you going to do? There's no village to go into, there's no real options other than being here, so you could hire yourself out when you're not on duty and get paid for helping build the fort. Well, Lotbinière paid them in vouchers that are good at the camp canteen, the one place where you can legally buy alcoholic beverages. Guess who has the license for the camp canteen? Lotbinière. So a lot of the other French officers here are constantly complaining that Lotbiniere is here to make money and not to build a fort. And so a trick question for students is, when was the fort built? Well, it was built in 1755, in 1756, in 1757, in 1758, and 1759. Lotbiniere is here the whole time, slowly building the fort, because he has no financial benefit to finishing building the fort. So you see a lot of grumbling throughout the time that Lotbiniere is not as efficient as he could be. And Lotbiniere is kind of a microcosm of the whole problem in the bureaucracy of all of New France. There's a lot of corruption up and down the line in the government of New France. While the French are building Fort Carillon, the British are building Fort William Henry, about 35 miles south of here, the southern end of Lake George. And in 1757, the French attacked Fort William Henry, made famous or infamous by Last of the Mohicans. Just keep in mind it's a work of fiction. It's based loosely, underline, highlight loosely, on historical fact. There's still ongoing debate about, was it a massacre or was it not a massacre? How big was it? James Fenimore Cooper does take literary license. Things happen at Fort William Henry. Montcalm, the French commander, has thousands of native allies who are from, I think, 26 different nations. So imagine the language challenges. He's got Native Americans from the western Great Lakes that are here with him. So just the communication issue to get the official word out to everybody is an ongoing challenge as well. When the French capture Fort William Henry, they destroy it, try to eliminate it as a potential problem for Fort Carillon. The British come back the next year and start building a new fort. They build a large fortified camp there. In 1758, the commander in North America of the British forces is James Abercrombie, and he is planning an attack on Fort Carillon and Fort St. Frederick, the next French fort north of here. And his plan, he's got one of those famous three-pronged attacks. The western prong is to attack Fort Duquesne, Pittsburgh. The eastern prong is to attack Fortress Louisbourg out on Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia. The center attack is Carillon, St. Frederick, and then right up Lake Champlain into the heart of Quebec. Abercrombie amasses an army of over 15,000 men. About 6,000 of them are British regular troops. The remainder are provincial troops. Provincial troops are troops from the colonies who enlist for a campaign. So generally they enlist and serve from May to November, May to October, then they go home. Some of them will re-enlist the next year for the next campaign. So most of the provincial troops that are here with Abercrombie are from New England, Massachusetts, Connecticut. They're based at the southern end of Lake George, and in early July 1758, Abercrombie embarks north. He uses over 1,000 bateaux to move an army that large and their supplies, and just assembling that many bateaux is a logistical accomplishment to do that. When Abercrombie lands at the northern end of the lake, about 4 miles from here, on July 5th, actually July 6th, and they start inland to secure the landing place, there's a skirmish that erupts, and the second in command for the British, Lord Howe, is killed in the exchange. Lord Howe is the mental, the tactical, strategic guy. Abercrombie's the logistics guy. So now you've lost kind of the person who's going to really command the attack on Fort Carillon. Lord Howe is the older brother of two people who play a key role in the American Revolution. William Howe, commander of the British Army, 1776 into 1777, and Richard Howe, the admiral commanding the naval fleet. So he's from a very prominent family. When Lord Howe is killed here, he is so well respected by the colonists that his monument in Westminster is paid for by the Provincial Assembly of Massachusetts. So he's really well respected person. Abercrombie, with the death of Lord Howe, there's a little bit of a delay. So we've got over almost 15,000 men about 3 to 4 miles from here. Here at Fort Carillon, the Marquis de Montcalm is the commander. He's got about 4,500 men. And he knows he has this large army coming. How do you defend Ticonderoga? Well, the fort can't hold 4,500 men. About 400 men can actually physically stay in the fort. So anytime there's more than 400 men here, the majority of them are in camps around. He can't bring them all into the fort, there's just not enough room, and he's worried about the heights of the vulnerability. So he knows that an attack is coming, he's already making plans, and over the few days, July 5th, 6th, and 7th, they construct the French lines, a log wall about 8 feet tall,